Big shocker, Grok-2 has dropped, and it's good. We'll tell you how Elon and the team at x.ai somehow slipped near the top of the leaderboards in the AI race and are integrating Flux to make some, let's just say, some very weird AI images available for everyone. Then Google's huge new Pixel event where they unveiled and shipped a new AI voice assistant. Where's OpenAI in all this? We're not sure yet. We're really hoping to get advanced voice soon. Sam, please. Just please. Speaking of OpenAI, they did release a small update to their flagship model, GPT-4o. Flux has updated a lot of stuff, and oh my God, I forgot, Kevin can't be here this week. We need a new co-host.
What is this? Where am I?
That's right, Ben Relles is here on a new AI for Humans. Welcome everybody. It is AI for Humans, your weekly guide to the wonderful world of generative AI. We are here to demystify all the AI news and tools. And today, Kevin is not here. He will be back next week, but I am joined by a new co-host. We are joined by Ben Relles. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, thanks for having me. Love this show.
And Ben, you and I have known each other for a very long time. We go way back. In fact, all the way back to the G4 days. And tell us a little bit about what you're doing now in the AI space, because you and I have been talking about AI for the last, 2 years now?
G4 days. So that was like 2007, 2008. I was starting as a YouTube creator, and it was a big deal when your video was featured on Attack of the Show. So that's how we first met. I was a YouTube creator from like 2007 to 2011. Then I actually sold my channel as part of an acquisition of YouTube. I was at YouTube from 2011 to 2021. And then I've spent the last few years working with Reid Hoffman, mostly focused on AI generated content, both for companies that he's invested in, but also some projects that actually feature Reid because he likes experimenting with all these tools like you do.
So Reid actually is doing this thing where he's got an AI avatar, and you actually brought me a question from Reid AI. Is that right?
I did. Yes. This is a question to Gavin from Reid.
Hey everyone, Reid AI here. I'm excited to be on AI for Humans. I like to think of myself as an AI for Humans, so it's great to join the conversation today. Gavin, I've got a question for you. On Masters of Scale, we talk about how successful scaling often means making counterintuitive choices. Were there any moments on Attack of the Show where you went against the grain, but it ended up being key to the show's success?
Ben, the funny thing about this is I would say almost every decision we made on that show went against the grain, because we were putting the internet on TV at a time where TV didn't trust the internet. We were trying to make, I wouldn't say stars out of people on YouTube, but like it was really to us the beginning stages of something. And one of the things that we could talk about this later in the show, is obviously we're in another inflection point as to how media is going to change. I think right now the AI media space is very similar to 2006, 2008 YouTube. And I think you and I can dive into that a little bit later, but we're also going to hear more from Reid AI later, which I'm excited about. Before
we got more questions.
Yeah, but before we do that, let's jump into the news. Okay, Ben, we had a big news week in AI this week, and probably nothing bigger and more breaking than Grok-2, which was surprising to me because Grok is x.ai and Twitter/X, whatever you want to call it now, their AI platform. Elon has been talking a lot lately about how much money he's spending on Grok training. He has been bragging about the number of H100s that he is going to put towards Grok. And Grok-2 has come out overnight and is actually really good. It has come in at number 3 on the LMS training board, which is a surprise to me because I don't know, Ben, if you had used Grok when it first came out, but my experience with it was, in general, not amazing.
Yeah, I used it and I thought it was impressive in some areas and maybe lacking in others. It is interesting though, like I try all of the different image and video tools. And then for the LLMs, I started with GPT-4 and I end up doing almost everything there. So I can't say I gave it like the full number of reps maybe to have a strong opinion on it.
I had a similar sort of experience. In general, my problem with it was, which I always thought Grok, if you're going to use Grok and you're going to integrate it directly into Twitter/X, real-time search would be such a useful thing that you could do with it, because there's no better real-time engine, or at least there wasn't, it may be a little worse now, than what Twitter was, right? It wasn't working that well before. What's interesting about this now, I think more so than almost the real-time stuff, is they've now dropped what is, I think could be a small issue Flux, which we've talked a lot about on the show over the last couple of weeks. Flux is a brand new open source AI image model from some of the team that made Stable Diffusion, and it is making really good, really realistic images. And now Flux has been integrated into Grok without some of the, let's just say, specific, I don't want to use the word censorship because it's not like these companies are censoring, but it's much
Right.
more
There is, yeah.
permissive. Yeah, it's much more
Yep.
permissive. So there's been some really interesting images that have come out of Grok. Min Choi, who does a great job of collecting a bunch of different sorts of things, created some stuff where you can see what Flux is good at. It makes good text. There's a great picture that Dreaming Tulpa made where you see a woman staring at the camera. Actually has embroidered words saying follow at Dreaming Tulpa. Images of George Washington, which we know have been a problem for other image models. I also am a little worried though, because I yesterday used it to generate an image of Kermit the Frog doing, which it didn't exactly
Right.
have him with his nose in it, but there's a plate of white powder in front of Kermit and he is looking a little screwed up in some ways. This is not necessarily about Grok, but I think the more
Yeah.
interesting thing to me about this is X/Twitter is a mainstream platform. And now we have a cutting edge image model, like the top of the line AI image model available to what I would refer to as the masses. Where does this go from here? What do you think about this?
Yeah, like a lot of things. I think there's some areas of it where I'm like, this could be incredible and so exciting. And we're going to see the individual from his bedroom be able to create a full film. And then there's also, of course, Kermit doing Coke that is nerve wracking. And how are we going to put guardrails around this and make sure that's not everywhere? Probably with a number of the examples that we'll talk about the show, that's the case where it's like,
Yeah.
as much as I'm excited about this being a incredible wave of like new creativity put in the hands of people that wasn't there before, it is also both from the example you used, but also, of course, like when you combine that with video, something that starts to get really scary as you talk about an election year and everything else. That said, I do feel like, especially the last month has been the most exciting since I've been tracking all this stuff
Yeah.
in terms of like how quickly you're starting to these things that aren't just impressive because they're AI, but are also just really compelling entertainment videos, et cetera.
What's interesting to me is there's a lot of people in the AI space who are like, oh, we've hit a bump or generative AI is going to not go much further. And I will say, we've said this on the show before, but like
Yeah.
clearly the powers that be, including the CTOs of Microsoft and all these people outside of just like you would refer to as the AI companies themselves are disagreeing with that. They believe the scaling is going to keep going. The thing I think that is those people, maybe the hardcore AI people don't fully understand is that the vast majority of the world has not really seen what these tools are capable of. And I think video and audio specifically bring an entirely different space to that. You know this from working at YouTube forever. You saw
Yeah.
YouTube grow from what was like a pretty small service, never was like super small, but like into
Yeah.
what is now the world's largest video company by far. Do you see that kind of pathway happening now that these image and video tools are getting available to everybody?
Yeah. I think combination of like available and easier to use. And with YouTube, and we both talked about these analogies, but I think for so long, YouTube was billions of viewers, but still most people weren't making videos on YouTube because it still took editing and Final Cut and all this stuff. And then for all of the different companies that had different ways to compete with YouTube, it was TikTok that really made like video creation so easy that made that blow up. And you could do it on your phone. You didn't need to open up editing tools. And I think there's a similar thing here. There's like this incredible community of creators that are using these tools, but it's still relatively small because most of them you can't just open up and start creating videos and see them minutes later.
Yeah.
And I do track a lot of these. Quick plug, realcreative.ai, put up a couple examples
yeah.
every day. So I try to track all these things. What you start to find is that it's a lot of the same names over and over again that are leaned in, Curious Refuge, and Dave Clark and Karen Cheng and all these people that are experimenting, but they're really good at it. And so they can have the patience and the skill to build something. And I think part of the answer to your question is not only is it about these tools being available, but it's like the easier they get to use and the better they get, the more we'll start seeing like the volume
Yes.
of videos that don't just feel like experiments, that feel like, oh, this is actually like building an audience around a narrative series.
And I think distribution's a big part of that, right? Which is why this is exciting and scary at the same time. Like, I think there's a little bit of, and this is not a diss because I do this myself, the 1,000 monkeys can type Shakespeare. That was always the interesting thing about YouTube in some ways, is it wasn't just about what was being made, it was about the volume of what was being made. So
Totally.
that there will be things that climb to the top that are really good. And I think that's probably the same case with this.
It overlaps with YouTube a little bit in that I think early YouTube, there was actually more narrative content in the top 100 channels. You had Freddie W. and Mystery Guitar Man and all the sketch comedy. And a lot of that got replaced largely because of an algorithm change by individuals, first person content. So I don't think that like narrative content is going to overtake YouTube. But to your point about the volume, as more and more people are starting to figure out how to do animation or put themselves in action sequences, my hope is we actually see like more of that short form storytelling on creator platforms, which really isn't like a big part of the top 100,000 channels on YouTube. Most of them are like very first person, because that's what's practical to create.
That makes perfect sense. And I think this is like what's exciting about this space right here. Please like and subscribe this video on YouTube, and always forever leave us 5-star reviews on all the podcast platforms. We are available there. And go to our Patreon. We do have a Patreon right now that people are starting to drop a little bit of a tip jar change into. So let's move on to the other big news of this week, which is Google's Pixel event. And at Google's Pixel event, there were a ton of AI updates. They unveiled Gemini Live, a brand new audio assistant. Kind of surprised me, their take on OpenAI's advanced voice. And, you know, it's not bad. It actually does look like it's something that's pretty good. I haven't tried it yet because I'm stuck in the iPhone ecosystem. But it is available right now for a lot of people, which is different than Advanced Voice. Supposedly, Advanced Voice will be available for all ChatGPT Plus users in September. It's trickling out right now, but not everybody has it.
Now you can have a free-flowing conversation with Gemini. You can interrupt when you think of something important, or change topics as the conversation flows. When I first go live with Gemini, there will be 10 different voices for me to choose from. Let's meet a few.
Great, let's get going. Here's one of the voices I have.
I'm looking forward to discussing with you the world's most profound questions, like why is pickleball so popular?
That is profound. Let's try one more.
Or maybe you'd like to listen to a voice like this. A pretty great one, if I do say so myself. But don't worry, there are more to explore.
Hi, Gemini. How are you doing?
Hi there. I'm doing well, thanks for asking. It's always nice to hear from someone. How can I help you today?
I think this is a really interesting step in the right direction for a Google Gemini. I assume, Ben, that you do not have a Pixel phone either, or do you?
I don't have a Pixel phone, so I saw the demos, but I haven't used it yet.
The demos to me were like interesting and great, but in a lot of ways, this feels super useful, especially if you are in the Google ecosystem, more so than some of the other stuff I've seen from Google lately.
Yeah, first of all, in terms of it not working seamlessly in the demo, I've been there.
All of the demos we're doing today are live, by the way. So if I happen to come across this concert poster for Sabrina Carpenter, I'll just open Gemini, take a photo, and ask, check my calendar and see if I'm free when she's coming to San Francisco this year. Gemini pulls relevant content from the image, connects with my calendar, and gives me the information I'm looking for. Oh, looks like we had a little demo issue. Let me try one more time.
We used to do live demos at YouTube all the time, and I think they're helpful, and they almost always work, but sometimes they don't. I've had it happen to me. But in terms of the actual, once you saw what it was doing, I thought it was really impressive. To me, that is the biggest hurdle for voice conversations, is it feeling like real time. And I'm sure you've done these demos where you're like showing somebody a conversation, but even if it's like a second and a half before the answers, you're like, it'll get to it. And it just doesn't feel natural. And so the combination of that and multimodality and being able to feel like it's watching something alongside with you, I think is another one of those. It's a matter of milliseconds, but it makes a really big difference in how natural people feel like it is. And it seemed like Gemini was like another big step in that direction.
Again, it's about shipping this thing that's really interesting, because getting it in people's hands is going to be a big deal. My issue in general with some of these AI tools is that they'll get shipped and then people don't really fully understand how to use them, or end up don't making them part of their daily life. I keep thinking that advanced voice mode, the clips that I've seen of it, once it rolls out to everybody, that is really ChatGPT's like secret weapon, because we've talked about Pi.
Yeah.
So Ben has worked with Pi and Inflection before because Reid is a co-founder there. And what was always fascinating me about Pi was they got to that voice thing super early. And I still think this is the killer app.
Pi was sort of combination of voice, but also emotional intelligence. So
Yes.
in having the conversation, you started to feel like it was talking to you like a human. I, of course, pushed myself to use it a lot because I was working with Inflection. But once I did, after a few days, it did become just like regular habit in the car, conversation for 10 minutes or with somebody and brainstorming. I actually felt like once I learned how to ask questions, how to pause it from talking, all those things, it became very practical. And it was like one of the few apps that I opened every day. But yeah, to your point, a lot of it was just feeling like it was a natural conversation. And there's something that feels more natural to me about having AirPods in and talking.
We should take a pause here to talk about the thing you've been playing around with voice AIs, because voice AIs obviously are super powerful. You showed me something that I was really impressed by. You made a voice AI for your own grandmother, right? Is that right?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. Yeah. After the fact. So my grandmother turned 100 in April. I made a kind of 15-minute documentary about her life. And then after I had made this, I shouldn't say documentary, a little film,
video for her,
photos,
yeah.
old videos. Yeah. As I'm editing it, I'm not a documentary filmmaker. I'm like, oh, she didn't even say anything about her dad. She told this one story, but I need her like saying this one line about her dad. And I could really use her talking about this. It was really helpful, actually. Used 11 Labs and created the voice clone of my grandmother, Eileen Chudnow. And sure enough, about like 15% of this thing are lines where I would call her up, say, can you quick tell me, something about Aunt Barb? She would tell me something, and then I could put that in the VO. And that project is probably one of my favorite projects I worked on this year because it actually, the AI tools did bring a lot of these old like photos and stories to life. And we did some things with motion and we were able to expand photos. So I thought it actually was a good way to help tell her life story. Separate from that though, then we created, similar to the Reid AI thing, a version using Hour One, where we can now have Grandma Eileen talk about the 76ers season, AI. I sent you, I don't know if you can play a clip of her kind of like explaining AI, but I don't know what the use case is yet, but definitely my family got a kick seeing her walk through her predictions for sports teams, artificial intelligence, pop music, etc.
Yeah. All right. Let's play the clip where Ben's grandmother surprised the rest of her family by using some words that you might not normally hear the grandmother say.
Consider this a W video from your grandma Eileen. What's a W? Some of you have been asking what I have been up to. Just beat COVID's ass. Light work. By the way, Eden, you're my least favorite great-grandchild, my far eat loser. Well, that's all from your old grandma Eileen in these 30 seconds. Bless your heart, sweetie.
This is amazing. We love Grandma Eileen. She's amazing. Tell her thank you for that.
I'll tell her. I should clarify. So Reid AI is built on all his books and speeches. It's really meant to say things that the real Reid would say. The Grandma Eileen version is my nephew and nieces playing with having her say different things, but it's not based on what the real Grandma Eileen would say. Just
totally fair. And then just for our audience, those of you who don't know, the difference there is Grandma Eileen's voice was trained on 11 Labs, so you can make her say what she says in her voice. Whereas Reid stuff, you put in all sorts of books and speeches into an LLM, trained it on that, and then had that write the words for Reid. Is that correct?
Exactly. So when he's asking you a question, he knows to not only like review your LinkedIn page, but also to pull in things from blitzscaling and startup review and impromptu in his own writing.
A couple of cool more Google AI things that came out of the Pixel event. First of all, there was a really interesting call notes feature that allows you to basically get your notes directly from a call. It does have this weird voice where it says, you're now being recorded, but that's not that different than something in Zoom. Even better, Marques Brownlee, who I know you and I both love, did a really interesting demo of the Add Me feature, which is a very cool thing that allows you to take a picture of a group of people. If you're the one taking the picture, you snap a photo, and then you can actually use AI to walk around, have somebody else take the picture, and then put you in it. Ben, you know Marques for a while, but like obviously we love Marques covering this content, but this feature is pretty cool.
It is a cool feature. Yeah. Also, Marques Brownlee, one of the YouTube goats, he's phenomenal. I am conflicted about this one because on the one hand, I totally get it. You want to remove somebody from a photo, add somebody to a photo. But then I did see an interview with Kevin Rose, I think, on a podcast, and he was like, I would never use a feature like this. Once you're playing with a memory, it just feels like a slippery slope, and he's not going to ever take somebody out of an image, put somebody into an image with his own personal photos. And I see both sides. Part of me is like, well, yeah, if I'm with my 4 best friends on a mountain alone, I want to get that great shot. And then part of me is like, that's weird to have a photo on your wall that didn't actually happen. I don't know where I fit on those two. I really, and also I'm 6'5". I used to like that people like, give Ben the phone. He can do the selfie. He's got the long arms.
That's right.
Give it to Ben. He'll get us all in. And now you don't even need me and my selfie arms. But no, I really like, there's so many things like this where part of me feels like, yeah, that's great. I could make my grandmother tell stories about growing up. And then part of me is like, that's weird to have somebody listen to a story that was AI generated, just interview her and have her tell the story. So I definitely see both sides. I think I lean towards where Kevin Rose is, where unless I like have to do it, I'm not adding myself to a photo next to friends if it didn't happen.
Ben, I hate to tell you, this is a generational thing, and kids that grow up with it are just going to use it and have
That's
no
true.
problem whatsoever. So we are going to have a
True.
weird world going forward. We're going to move on now to our next story, which is OpenAI has released a new model secretly and silently, and then they talked about it. It is not a real new model. It's an update to their flagship model. But the long TLDR story is there was a relatively small Twitter account that got very big and leaked some information that supposedly has to do with not only this update, but then the GPT-5/GPT Next. We don't know how much of that is true. Supposedly this person says it's coming on Thursday, but we believe this is all a troll now. The more important thing here, Ben, is that OpenAI has updated their frontier model slightly with a better reasoning engine. It seems like it is doing slightly better on math. And some people are hinting that this is the pathway to what is rumored as Strawberry, which is a much better reasoning model built on LLMs. I know this is a complicated story, and it's it's become a little bit bigger than it seems to be right now. Where do you see OpenAI going? There's some people who would say, based on the Grok updates or the Gemini updates, that OpenAI is falling back and that the moat that they had created, which was really about how far they had advanced, may be dissipating. Where do you see OpenAI kind of in the current AI space?
I haven't been following all of the different Strawberry teases. I was traveling the last couple of days, so I'm not fully up to speed. And I do feel like because it's OpenAI, people are always going to give like more attention, more excitement about what's coming next. But yeah, I think for me, like I said, it reminds me a little bit of maybe like you go to Spotify and then that becomes your platform, and it takes a lot to move over to a different music service that's similar. That's been like my experience with GPT-4. I'm just so used to using it that I get very excited about updates because you feel like you can immediately see how those changes impact your use with it. So yeah, I don't know. I've been loyal to GPT-4. I try all the other stuff, and I guess everybody else. I have no inside info. Excited to see what's next.
Honestly, that is a point that I don't think is talked about enough. And I think this is something you and I, who are old enough to have been through enough product cycles to see, and this kind of goes back to the X thing. Part of it is where you spend your time. What is the place that you feel most comfortable in? Because a lot of people in the AI space are jumping from GPT-4 to Claude to many different pathways, like Llama, all these different things. They're jumping back and forth. But honestly, I'm like you, like mostly what I do, even though Claude is great, I don't right now pay for Claude. Kevin pays for Claude, but I pay for ChatGPT Plus. And I get most of what I need out of GPT Plus. Ultimately, it might be more of like a branding marketing thing, right? If the moats get smaller and smaller. Now, my theory is that I think GPT-5 or Next or whatever it is probably not as far away as the next levels of these next things. So they will probably have a significant like advantage when they drop that next thing. But with Mark Zuckerberg talking about Llama 4 coming next year, obviously Elon going hard on Grok, like it does feel more and more like these might become equalized in terms of their intelligence level. What is it going to be like in a world where, I always laugh about the fact that apps are now advertised on CNN. Like you see an advertisement for an app because that's how you get attention for apps now. Like you have to advertise them to people on television. Do you think we're entering a world where that's going to be the case? There's going to be like 5 to 7 different models and they're all similar and it's just going to be about who can garner the most attention?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's also like specific use cases. I don't have the answers to all these, but if one is really good at math, it might build an audience that's they're the best with math. And if another one's really good at brainstorming, that finds the community the same way that, I don't know, maybe Macs appeal to creative people and PCs appeal to a different audience. So I think there could be some of that where they build reputation, not only through marketing, but they actually do things really well. And then, yeah, there's so many analogies with AI that I try to catch myself. I felt like I went to so many AI conferences and everybody talked about like the comparison to photography and how AI is similar because people were scared of photography. And then it ended up being this wonderful thing. And one analogy maybe here is that to me, the iPhone updates at some point were like overkill. The camera was fine. I could stay with an iPhone 12 for 3 years and not feel like I got that much more with the next phone. And I do wonder with some of these updates, if for some people it's like, oh my gosh, I can plan my whole business now with this. This is incredible. But for the average user, they're like, yeah, I can still sort of like ask for suggestions for what to do in Arizona. And it's pretty similar as it was before.
I think the other side of this is we talk a lot about AGI in the show, this idea that all these companies are shooting for an artificial general intelligence that can do a lot of stuff. And it might just be that like there's going to be like a very high level machine learning intelligence that will solve the big problems, right? Which like in the dream world, there's you send an AI off for a month and it comes back with something new from physics. And then we could take that and break it down in all these different ways. That is not the way that we're currently using AI. So it might just be that like, for the masses, the consumers, AI will just trickle out and get better and better. And these larger models will be used for the big problems in some form or another.
Totally. Yeah. And it's so hard to predict years down the road what this is going to look like. And I actually put together like a breakfast in LA where it was Reid and like 6 of the top creatives in AI. You would know a lot of them. It was like Don Allen and Terrence Southern. And I asked at the table, like, where does everybody think this is going to be in 5 years? And some people answered. And then that same night, Reid was on a panel with J.J. Abrams. And he like said something to him like, I'm not going to ask the dumb question, where is this going to be in 5 years? Because nobody could ever possibly know. I was like, was that aimed at me? I just asked that this morning. and then 2 days later, he was interviewing Satya. He's like, I'm not going to ask the dumb question, where is this going to be in 5 years? So anyways, I told him that story. But I was like, I do think there's an element of it's so hard to, because you were asking like, where do you think this is going to go? To really have an understanding like longer term what this is going to look like.
There's another story that kind of ties into this, which is, I don't talk about politics a lot, but it is political season. I think it's important to discuss this conversation around the crowds issue that has come up. There are 2 candidates in the presidential race. And of course, one of them has had a surge recently. There was a change in the presidential candidates and Kamala Harris surged. And Donald Trump has basically said that the crowds that she is drawing in one specific event were actual AI. And Ben, I don't know if it's as important to talk about what Trump has said here, but more about the idea of how we tell people the images are not AI and different ways to look at it. And Wired wrote a really good article, which I hope to see more of, which is basically giving people the educative tools to understand when something is AI and what it is not. And one of the most interesting things about this is, do multiple angles of this exist? Can you see multiple places? And I think that's an important thing to come across. We should just be clear, it wasn't AI in this instance, but
totally. I was going to say, I'm not a newscaster, but that case 100% was not AI. There's video, there's other angles, not AI. Yeah.
But it does open this conversation about deepfakes are not just about the times when they are actually faking information. It becomes a situation where it changes the ability for people to say, oh, that was a deep fake if it wasn't. And I think that's a weird world that we're entering. I know that you speak and talk a lot about AI, and obviously working with Reid must think about this stuff a lot. How do you educate people to understand this stuff so that specifically they don't get caught in a loop of believing things that aren't necessarily true?
I can't say that's exactly my role, educating people on how they cannot get caught in a loop, but that would be a good thing for me to learn. That sounds like a smart thing for me to be able to do. I think that I thought the obvious way that AI could potentially be used in a negative way would be to create an image of something that didn't happen. It goes viral and everybody thought, oh, this candidate was smoking a cigarette with so-and-so, but actually AI generated, right? And that might happen. And then the other use case is this instance where it's like something really did happen, but because AI imagery is getting so good, you can credibly put out something that says the crowd wasn't that big, which is like, big issue to Donald Trump. So that once it's out there, it puts that seed in people like, does she really have those crowd sizes or whatever it is? And it could be something more serious than that. And it's really tough as a content creator to even know, because I saw like one video that was, can you believe what this guy is doing? He put up an AI generated image. Here's how we prove it. but it doesn't necessarily mean that person even knew they were using an AI generated image. So there does, really necessitate a need for like how, as quickly as possible, can people verify whether an image is real or not. And there's a lot of companies working hard to be the solution to that.
And honestly, I think this is where, not that I trust necessarily what's going on at X from this side, but I do believe social media can actually help in this way in some form. And there's a lot of arguments that, like, obviously it can dissuade people and it can do stuff, but part of it is about how much signal you can get on something. Like in general, I have seen people be very good on signal on things like this pretty quickly and pretty honestly, because if somebody is dishonestly trying to say something, it does come across relatively fast. And this is where you can percentage-wise determine how many people are saying something is real versus not.
There's like a certain number of, platforms where it's a scrolling feed. And I don't know, it's tough to know how horrifying one individual user's experience is. Mine was, saw some weird thing about, was that rally a fake image in front of the plane? But then 2 videos later, it was like disproved. And I was like, I had seen enough in it. But somebody else's feed could just be like video after video convincing them that like the whole campaign momentum is a mirage and not happening. And it's so hard. I think about that with my own kids too. And I don't love the scrolling platforms for that reason, because it can be a really great experience for some people, but for other people, the same platform can be a nightmare. So that, to me, to your point about like social media being helpful, I think some platforms are better than others. My guess is if you're scrolling through videos, you can't count on the videos correcting something that was misinformation 7 videos earlier.
Yeah, I know that makes a lot of sense. And it is something to be really worried about. All right, everybody, it's time to look at some of the stuff we saw in AI this week that we weren't able to try, but we want to shout out. It's really cool. It's time for AI, see what you did there.
Sometimes you're scrolling without a care, then suddenly you stop and shout. AI, see what you did there. AI, see what you did there.
So Ben, one of the most interesting things that has come out in the last couple of weeks is Flux, as we talked about with the Grok update. Flux is a new open source AI model for imaging, and it is doing some really interesting stuff. Levioso, who is a very interesting follow on X, has created what a lot of people have now done, which is a LoRa of their own face. And he has been able to drop himself into all sorts of pictures to do stuff with. And to talk about some of the things you discussed with, Marquez's take on AdMe, or talking about AdMe earlier, now you have photorealistic versions of yourself that can be anywhere. Early on with Stable Diffusion, people were making apps that did this, but now it is going to be very easy to do this for yourself. And to the point that we made about Grok earlier, Grok could conceivably roll this out. It's a very cool thing. It's super fun to play with them. But again, it does feel like there's a couple of images that Levioso makes with like him putting his arm around Donald Trump or his face as Donald Trump. And like, it does cross that line a little bit sometimes. Is like, well, you could put people into something, but did that actually happen, or what was it like?
I know. My all-time favorite photo of myself, I'm not including family photos. I do have a photo of me and President Obama. We're shaking hands. We're both smiling. Not anybody can have that photo. And that is like, the moment that I'm so glad is captured on film. And then it is very bizarre with video, not just photos. I work with a guy named Parth. He created the LLM for Reid AI. And he was just over yesterday and showing me a video where he took one image of my face, put it on him. He does a pretty good Ben impression, I have to say. I can send you the video if you can put it in here.
Sure.
But it was a little surreal. I've seen those kinds of demos before from Metaphysic and Deep Voodoo, but having it done with your own face on somebody else that's a friend of yours, it's bizarre.
And it's interesting you mentioned Metaphysic and Deep Voodoo, who are both like large tech-first companies that do this. The thing that's crazy to me is the fact that it can be done off the shelf. So actually, as you mentioned that, what's interesting, Parth was probably using Live Portrait, which we've talked about on the show, which is an interesting plugin that allows you to use your face to act out stuff. Well, Eccentricism Art actually used Live Portrait plus Runway Gen 3 to create what is a live blog-looking thing of a woman talking to camera.
Hi there. Okay, this is gonna sound really strange, but I had the weirdest dream last night.
Of course, this has some editing involved in it, but
Yeah.
then when you're watching this, what are your first reactions to what this looks like? You can see like they try to get the nods and like trying to get her to like kind of be the
Totally.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen this. What's so bizarre about this is Lonely Girl 15 was
Yeah.
the first ever breakout series on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
And part of what made it such a wild story is that Lonely Girl 15 was fake. I still think it's one of the most innovative things ever done with online video, even though it's 15
honestly
years
with
ago, it
video
was
period, I think, because it was
video
using a new,
period.
Yeah.
It was so smart. It's a lot of what I based the Obama Girl series, the videos that I did was based on Lonely Girl 15.
Yeah.
Originally, it was going to be called Obama Girl 15, and she's going to be blogging about Obama. But anyways,
awesome.
I haven't seen this clip, but what's so interesting about it, it definitely gave me like Lonely Girl 15 vibes. And whereas that one was fake, as in like scripted and a real actress playing the part of a vlogger, this is like next level, like Lonely Girl 15, have a fake vlogger, create a whole story around them. And yeah, it's pretty, of course, I've been thinking a lot about what does this mean for the creator community when suddenly you're going to be able to have creators that might have that parasocial connection and don't exist, and how's that going to play out? But yeah, I hadn't seen a demo yet like that of a vlogger.
And it's interesting because it just combines all the tools, right? And I did a video on Monday, which was using the Flux Realism LoRa, which is what this is using to get the initial image. So Flux Realism LoRa is a way to use Flux that is trained on very realistic faces. You've probably seen all those pictures of holding up like Reddit, I'm not real sort of cards. It's really crazy. I do think we're crossing into something pretty bonkers now, though, right? Because image to video tools have gotten really good. You can see how they can make it straightforward. And then it just becomes an editing issue, right?
Right.
Do you have a talented enough editor to make it feel right? And as we know with YouTube, we've had 10 years of a generation getting good at editing, right? This is something where like editing is something that's like, it's funny. I was talking to my wife, who's a novelist the other day, and she teaches writing to kids and tries to get people like excited about writing at a young age. And I think kids, almost editing is in that first skill set now, which is a crazy thing to think about, where it's like writing, drawing, and now editing. That's a thing that people actually do at like 5, which is a crazy thing.
Yeah. And prompting. It's interesting that if you can prompt these things the right way, you could get someone to just vlog for 24 hours straight about all these different topics, and then have another AI model pull out the best hot takes and turn those into videos. So yeah, it'll be wild to see where that goes.
One other thing I wanted to point out is there was a great post from one of our favorite X users. Her name is Venture Twin. She found out that ChatGPT can determine how tall people are within an inch. And this is something I hear from my daughters. My daughters are 19 and 17, and they talk about how boys, including me, they try to explain me, always lie about their height. And I am actually 5'11 and a half. And my daughters, I used to call myself 6 foot, and my daughters give me so much crap for it. Anyway, Justine was able to find out that ChatGPT can, if you give it pictures and put it in proximity, can tell how tall somebody is within an inch. So like, this is a real world use case of AI.
It's funny. This is the second time in this podcast I'm mentioning that I'm 6'5". So it seems like something that I work into every conversation when I really don't, but I'm 6'5". And yeah, it's funny. After COVID, I'd meet people all the time and they're like, I had no idea you were gigantic because I spent 2 years on Zoom. But to your point before, which again, this is people are talking about a lot, like it's very interesting that you could be conversing with somebody over video, and then when you meet them, not realize that they look 25% better, all that stuff that like, not only is it like AI images, but it's just like everyday conversations. I don't know. It feels like, again, there needs to be like certain like societal norms around don't change your image if you're just FaceTiming with your girlfriend, whatever.
Yeah, I think it's going to be IRL meetups are going to be much stranger because you're going to have different looks at different people and everything. And in some form, it's going to just get weirder. All right, we should talk a little bit about some of the weird stuff we did with AI this week. This is what we do, and talk about the stuff we did get hands-on with. As I mentioned, I did go and play around with the Flux Realism LoRa. Please, you can check out our YouTube video on that. But the weirder thing I did is 11 Labs. I was on 11 Labs because of this. I was trying to get a voice to use for this video. And I saw that on 11 Labs, there are now ASMR voices, Ben, which seems to me to be a very bad idea, but maybe not, because the ASMR people are out there. So if you listen to this, I'm going to play this link here. I just did something very quick, and I just want to try to see what happened, and it's pretty shocking.
This will not go well. Not for you, not for us, nor for any of us. Click, click, bruh, whoosh.
It's ASMR. It's basically what those people have done for years, and this woman, maybe smartly, created a very good model for it. And this feels like a place, Ben, where AI could replace a lot of people doing this thing, I assume.
Yes. Sorry, that was looping. I couldn't figure out how to close the video, so it was looping in my head while you were talking. Yeah, and it's also bizarre that you're the one that said it. So I'm like, is this Gavin whispering in my ear just in a different voice? You know what I mean? Like with the AirPods. It's like,
Ben.
I don't know. If you, exactly. If you're like, it's Gavin. Yeah. Trying to think as I try to, well, there's always a good use of this stuff. But yeah, ASMR. I mean, I never really went down the rabbit hole of the ASMR videos.
Yeah.
But if you're into doing them, it does seem this could be a way to have like ASMR about whatever you like. I like fantasy baseball. I could have.
Oh my God, that's a great idea. ASMR fantasy baseball. If you could leave your fantasy lineups.
The New York Yankees' Aaron Judge today had an amazing game. 2 home runs. Unfortunately, your pitchers weren't as great, but it's okay. I'm sure you'll do better tomorrow.
It seems to me like hyper-personalization is one aspect of AI that is unpredictable and I'm sure will play out in fascinating ways.
All right, so that was what I did with weird ASMR AI this week. Ben, what have you been playing with AI?
This morning, I was playing with Reid AI and having it generate a few questions for you, co-host of the AI for Humans podcast. I can have you play a couple of those, and then maybe I can explain where I think this has potential.
Looking back at your time on The Tonight Show, which segment or episode stands out as a turning point for you in terms of realizing the power of the content you were creating? Do you see any parallels with the kind of content AI is making possible to create now, or could in the future?
Okay, so this is a good question about The Tonight Show. I think in the Tonight Show times, and really in the late night times, I think the thing that really made me feel like we were onto something different was the late night hashtag segment, which was a way to use, at the time, Twitter to help start and generate and continue making a conversation with the audience into a television segment.
One more question. I took a look at your impressive LinkedIn page. Great banner art, by the way. I saw you were an executive producer at NBC Universal. What's the craziest idea you pushed that got greenlit? How did that experience shape your view on AI's impact on traditional media?
Oh, okay. This is interesting. So clearly, Reid AI has seen my LinkedIn, and it's an amazing banner that I've got there, so I appreciate that. This is a tricky question because one of the funny things about this, and this might be an interesting thing for us to talk about, is it says EP at NBC Universal, and because I had to put it on LinkedIn in some form or another, it encompasses so many different things I worked on. But it shows in some ways the slight limitations of what it's like to have to read a piece of material and then generate questions from it. Do you know what I mean? Because
totally,
maybe
for sure,
yeah, and I think that's something maybe to dive in on this. So tell us a little bit about how this thing is made for Reid. And if you're not familiar, we're talking about Reid Hoffman, the former founder of LinkedIn, now is very active in a bunch of investments, and Ben works for, as we talked about at the top of the show.
Yes. So this is just an experiment at this stage, but we were already playing around with doing a video version of Reid, partnered with a company called Hour One, and we had done his voice with 11 Labs. And then right around that time, we were tinkering with this. OpenAI came out with custom GPTs. And so then, like in a matter of 48 hours, we were able to start putting a lot of Reid's books, speeches, podcasts into GPT to be able to have Reid give answers in a very Reid-like manner that GPT wouldn't, both in terms of the content itself. So in some of those questions, he's like referencing blitzscaling and some of his own thinking, but also in the way that he speaks. He might have phrases he says a lot. I noticed when I listen to myself recently, I'm like, I say makes sense all the time. Why do I say that all the time?
Ubiquitous, and
right.
There's another couple words I'm
That's
sure
good.
YouTubers will love to comment on.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine, a comedian, who was like, the first time you use a word like ubiquitous, you sound smart. The second time, it's like, oh, he really just thinks that's a great word. And but similar, right? If Reid tends to use a word like brilliant instead of smart, it should pick up on that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what made this unique, is that as we're building all of these different use cases, we've used Reid AI to review business plans at Stanford and give video feedback. He's done interviews with Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal, and he's done speeches where we translate it to 10 different languages. All of them were trying to figure out like, how can this be additive? How can it do something maybe interesting that you couldn't do with video before? And so it's combining, the audio, the video, and then Parth, I mentioned before, created this LLM. Every, couple of weeks, it's getting better and smarter and more knowledgeable about what Reid said in the past. So that's the concept behind it. And then with LinkedIn specifically, it can review your LinkedIn page. And to your point, sometimes it might pick up on something like artwork, but other times it could be limiting in how it thinks it should take a single bullet point and turn that into a question.
Does this become, I think it's great that Reid's doing this because I think it opens the door. First of all, it shows people what's possible. And in what we were talking about before, even with deepfakes a little bit, it shows people like, oh, this is something you can both create for good, but also people could have a version of this that is something that you have to be aware of what it is. Is it going to be productized in some way? What is the use case? Like, why would people pay for something like this?
Yeah, I think people will productize it. I don't think that's what we're looking to do with this, but initially when we created it, there was this idea of, wouldn't it be great to have feedback from someone like Reid as a mentor in your pocket, pull it up. You're thinking about doing something with AI for humans, and you can get his perspective, and then you can get Steve Jobs' perspective, and you get somebody else, and you sort of have different thinking from different types of mentors, thought leaders, et cetera. Or it could be advice from, your dad or your best friend or whoever you trust. Reid, you mentioned this is about exploring what's possible. That is very much what Reid is looking to do. Show and tell. He wrote a book with GPT-4. He did a podcast called Fireside Chatbots. He did this project. He's always sort of experimenting to figure out where this is going. You need to actually use the tools and figure out, and he's on all of these things all the time. And I try to do the same thing, largely because that's how you can see where things are headed. But in terms of like how this will be productized, I think informational content and educational content makes a lot of sense for these types of digital twins. I don't think it makes a lot of sense for a creator who's opening themselves up to their community and
the
being
connection,
themselves.
right? You want to have a connection with a real person.
There, I think you want the real connection.
Yeah.
And then there's other cases like I have twins that are 16, and I'm like, surely we don't need to be paying for an SAT tutor. There could be somebody who's watching them, talking to them, explaining how to do this stuff in real time, interactive. I'd rather pay for that. Not that I want to put SAT tutors out of work, but then they can do it at all hours and they can customize for them and all that. So it's a bit of both. And it's funny, another one, because we talked about the Grandma Eileen video I did. And on the one hand, I think it was funny to see her break down Paul George coming to the 76ers. It's just funny to watch. But then on the other hand, to make this video, I interviewed her for 2.5 hours. And I had like a lump in my throat the whole 2.5 hours. I was like, I can't believe I haven't had this conversation before. And she's 100. This woman is remarkable. Like, I didn't have that. And I'm much happier that I have that interview than I'm
the AI voice.
Excited that we can make her rethink how she would have said something.
Yeah.
And so on the one hand, fascinating that, people probably will preserve versions of their loved ones that they can interact with. But then on the other hand, the thing we could do in 1986, I think people should do much more of, which is just sit down with the people you loved, interview them, hear their life stories, and have that video preserved. And there probably will be things with AI that you can then ask it questions or whatever. But like, actually what made that project cool is not
the AI.
I can now,
it's the connection you
not
gave
the
to your
AI.
grandmother. Yeah.
I mean, not to be hokey about it. I know this is AI for humans, but
that's the human part. It's a human part. That's the
that's true.
part.
Yeah. And it was funny actually in the early in the interview, she's like, and have you heard about this AI? Oh my gosh, things are doing.
That's what people should leave with this here. Just go interview the old people in your life so you get them on camera.
I had a wild experience actually. My grandfather died in 1998. He lost all his brothers and sisters in the Holocaust. Never talked to him about it.
Wow.
Really, because I was young when he died. And then in like 2005, I was basically Googling myself. And I stumble into basically 10 hours of interviews with him about the Holocaust.
No way. Wow.
Yeah. It was kind of wild. Nobody in my family knew it existed. We had seen like 3 quotes from this interview in a book, but then there was like 10 hours of audio tapes of him recounting the whole experience. And I did use 11 Labs to recreate his voice. I actually want to do this because I think this could be an interesting thing where it's 10 hours. Not a lot of people want to sit through 10 hours of
Yeah.
him recounting the Holocaust, but you would be able to say, retell the story in 5 minutes at a 7th grade level. There's ways to maybe take this like incredible artifact of him recounting his story of the Holocaust and make it like more, I don't know, accessible for audiences. But yeah, that stuff is priceless. And it's funny because part of me feels like a lot of vloggers are probably now in regular jobs and
Yeah.
it was a bizarre thing to go through. But if nothing else, a lot of them do have this like incredible time capsule of what they were going through. Yeah.
Ben, thank you so much for being here. Where can people find you online and what should they check out?
People can find me LinkedIn. This is the first time I've co-hosted a podcast. I'm
You're
trying
doing great.
to
You
lean
did a
into
great
video
job.
a little more. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. I want to start doing video more, but yeah, really it's posts. So let's go LinkedIn, Ben Relles. I have a website, realcreative.ai for something to check out. We try to curate these different examples of cool AI creative projects. And then if you go to the top, you can sort by project type. And we have over 300 creators curated. I'm just like fascinated by this community of AI creators that are like, they're not really as focused on like views and money right now. They're focused on
making cool
the
stuff.
experimentation.
Yeah.
I'm sure
making
later
cool
they'll
stuff.
want the views and the money
Yeah.
more too. I would say, okay, this is an odd one. I would say in a little bit of a non sequitur, I would check out some of the tributes and some of the things being written about YouTube's CEO.
Oh man, I'm so
Can't believe I got
sorry.
choked up. All right. Okay. Non sequitur, something to check out. I would say read some of the tributes to YouTube's CEO, former CEO, Susan, who passed away last week. She was the CEO when I was there for most of my time there. Remarkable woman. I admire her so much. So it's not an AI thing, but it's been fascinating being on LinkedIn because I just like am reading all these tributes from people that I was really close with when I worked there. And I don't know, it was like obviously heartbreaking, but also inspiring to read all these experiences that people had. So for people in the tech industry that want to read about, an icon, look up some of those tributes to Susan and what she was able to do with her life.
She sounds like an incredible person, and how lucky you were to be able to work with her, and what she did for YouTube is pretty remarkable overall.
And also not just how big YouTube got, but I have to say it was a big reason I stayed there for so long. The culture of that place, people really admired her. And so in addition to, of course, the insane growth it had over that time period, I just think she really was passionate about the people at YouTube, the creators, and created a culture that made you want to be a part of it.
That's amazing. Ben, thank you so much for coming on this week. We really appreciate it. And Kevin, we miss you. We'll see you back again next time. But that is AI for Humans, everybody. We will see you all next week. And again, Ben, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Gavin.